I do remember when Santander first launched in the UK, this is before that account, going on their corporate website, and they'd obviously just put it through Google Translate to get it into English. And it's
solid.
They've cleared it up.
I don't know if you were following this on Twitter, but there was some amazing stuff about N26 closing all of their UK accounts. So on Tuesday, they announced they're going to cease operations in the UK. The company is currently passporting on its EU banking licenses, and those rights end on the 31st of December 2020. The N26 was only introduced UK current accounts in October 2018, 2 years after the referendum, which is interesting timing. Now it says the withdrawal agreement makes its proposition impossible. Currently, N26 has several 100,000 customers, according to a spokesperson. How do we feel about this?
Well, I mean, the official line is possibly what's tipped them over the edge. I think it's kind of a capital requirements versus the value of doing it is probably the decision that they've come to. That, you know, if they're going to have to get a license in the UK with the capital requirements and all the costs that entails, is the value there at the moment in such a crowded market? I mean, you say such a crowded market versus the whole UK population, maybe not, but certainly those who are going to engage or have engaged in digital challenger apps. Is the value there for them to put their money into the UK versus potentially expanding what they're doing in the States? And
could get quite costly, yeah. And they're spending a lot of money on marketing in the States at the moment.
They are, yes.
And Ali, did you think this was a big loss for the UK ecosystem, the fintech world?
I'm going to be very honest.
No.
I read the thing and I thought, I call utter bullshit. There is no way.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Go for it, Ali.
Fair enough.
They're blaming Brexit,
Yeah.
first of all, which seemed very scapegoatish. Very good to see Bonk jump straight in with an incredible response to that. Yeah, I think they're not getting the traction in the UK. It's a very crowded market. You've got Monzo, you've got Starling, you've got everybody already in the UK. It's a crowded market. They're not doing as well as they wanted to. It's just easier, as you said, for them just to shut operations, and they're kind of using Brexit as a scapegoat. They didn't even need to mention Brexit there. They could have just said, we've decided to shutter operations, a bit like Fedor did.
Yeah.
It's
like, just own it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, own it. Own your failures. It seems like it seems like a bit of an excuse.
I remember when Monzo said, "Oh, we launched the Monzo Plus, and it hasn't worked. We're going to close that. We think it failed. Let's try again." And everybody went, "Ooh, that's credible. Yes, okay, yeah, it failed, and we all thought it kind of sucked, and now you've admitted that it sucked, and we kind of respect you for saying that." It's kind of the other end of the spectrum.
I suppose the interesting thing about N26 is that the strategy where it differs from, let's say, a Monzo, is that they haven't gone very deep in any particular territory, potentially Germany aside.
I think that's a really good point. They've gone quite shallow over a lot of markets. And even in Germany, they're still pretty shallow. So it was, I have to agree with you, the Brexit thing was unnecessary and probably unhelpful to them in the long run, because it sort of got people's backs up.
And Alex, sort of as you talk about the breadth versus depth kind of thing, what is it you think in the UK market? I mean, I know Starling's looking at moving into Ireland and other geographies. Do you think that this is something where going deep in markets and going slower is a stronger strategy, or just a different one?
Well, that's definitely the approach of Starling. But I think you've got to realise that people have very complicated relationships with money, and they're cultural and they're personal, and not the banking market and the banking culture is different in every country. So you can't just cut and paste the same sort of marketing approach from territory to territory. You've got to understand the local market that you're going into and adapt to that. And I think if you don't do that, you're going to come up with this kind of, you'll hit your head against a brick wall, and then you'll have to take a big decision. Do you relaunch? Do you repackage? Or do you pull out?
It's interesting that historically Santander actually did that quite well, in that they had the 123 account, which has been tremendously successful for them, but they would roll it out country by country, year after year, but it wasn't sort of 10 countries in 1 year with passporting. There was a timing difference there, Matt.
Sorry, let me just interrupt, because I've got this. I do remember when Santander first launched in the UK, this is before that account, going on their corporate website, and they'd obviously just put it through Google Translate to get it into English. And it's
solid.
They've cleaned it up now, but it was really
Right. So it was different at very first.
At the last minute, someone said, "Oh, damn, we've got to do the website." Oh, Google Translate.
Wow, that's a great story. Matt, what are your thoughts about N26 here?
Well, I mean, not only the marketing needs to be different in each geography or market, but the product perhaps needs to change as well. So I wonder if they found it hard to get market share where there was already a sort of quite advanced challenger bank sort of ecosystem in place.
I think it's a good point. I mean, there was a heavy spend on marketing. I think everybody remembers the adverts. I mean, if you're listening in the US at the moment, you can't escape N26 advertising.
New York,
it's kind of everywhere. But is that turning into conversion? And actually, marketing without product that follows through can be wasted spend quite easily. It's going to drive interest, but is it going to drive activation? I think it's always a different question.
I think it's a lot less advanced market over in the US, so there's a lot more to go for, and a lot less competition to compete with.
Yeah, potentially. But Chime have nearly 6 million users, and we'll come on to Varo later, who've just got their own charter. I mean, the US market's really changing.
N26, I think it's 250,000 they've managed to get in. I'm going to say 6 months. Someone's going to disprove me, but it's. Again, it's a marketing spend. It's a market. How many of those are? It's the same questions that you get over and over again when people release customer acquisition numbers. It's how many are active, what's the deposits, what's the features actually? Because I think going from one country to another country in the way that they've done, they've actually sort of the proposition that they've launched with has got less and less from a feature perspective. Some of that's due to regulation, some of it's not. But it's actually if you look at how skinny the app is across the world, it's
an interesting point actually. Like, what defines being launched? Because it's apples to oranges otherwise. And if you think about the feature set of a lot of the digital challenges in the UK, it's quite deep and quite broad at this point. But it's not necessarily the same that you would see even from some of the high street banks. Some by choice, right? Do you really need a checkbook? There are some things that a certain segment doesn't want as much or can be solved in different ways. But that feature set thing is quite an interesting thing to play with. And what's the definition of an active customer? It would be interesting to have an industry benchmark on that, because I know inside of some big banks that I've seen, there are some really creative definitions of, has logged into one of our services in the last 120 days, even if it's just to view the account. Oh, they're active. I'm like, that's pretty broad, but it has made a payment in the last 7 days or has done something transactional in the last month. That monthly active user thing might be more interesting.
Well, I think it depends, which sort of user you're after as well, because for banks, is it number of accounts, amount deposited, amount of transacted volume.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it was always the size of the deposit book, and the net interest margin was the traditional balance sheet measurement, but there are different ways to get there. And I think that it depends on your strategy. So there are nuances there.
Yeah, and I think it's a bit like in product or engineering, you use velocity to improve a team over time, but you can't use it to compare teams. So having a comparable metric is only really useful for pundits as opposed to the building. The entity
that's a really good
itself.
point.
Have you guys at Starling had a nice little spike of increased sign-ups following N26's announcement?
Well, we have had a nice spike in sign-ups, but we've also been in the news a lot this week because we've given shares to all our employees, we've raised money and so forth. So there's been a lot of things go on, but yes, we have.
And we shall come to precisely that point in a moment. But Ali, just before we do, there was something nice that Bunk did. Do you want to just take us through that?
Do you know, actually, we just want to take a moment to appreciate all the challenger banks on social media, because they've been. Curve did one about an hour ago, which is it just made me laugh. What did Bunk say? Bunk said, "You might have heard one of our fintech peers is leaving the UK. Fear not, Bunk is here to stay. Based on the current rules and regulations, we see no regulatory reason to leave the UK. In fact, we love you guys. Let's bunk together." Founder of CEO of Bunk. That's nice. I like that.